Hey, welcome to a new episode of Last Call Baseball, number 155. I'm Dorian. I noticed that I used to talk badly every single week about the Miami Marlins, and I joked that this had become a Miami Marlins podcast. No more Marlins talk. Now I'm obsessed about Paul Skeens. Every week I'm talking about the phenomenon, the amazing Pittsburgh Pirates rookie pitcher, Paul Skeens. Last week, he left to a standing ovation on the road when he was pitching against the St. Louis Cardinals. He pitched 6 1/3 innings. I think he struck out 9 batters. I don't have the numbers in front of me. I don't know if it was impressive or weird. I'm going to go with weird. He was very good in that game. But to give a standing ovation to a rookie pitcher who pitched really well against you, if you're St. Louis Cardinals fans, obviously, because you were playing at home and Pittsburgh was the visiting team, I think it's kind of weird. And of course, then the baseball world was like, oh, look at how classy the Cardinals. The St. Louis Cardinals can do no wrong. And it drives me crazy sometimes. Do the Cardinals fans give a standing ovation to an opposing player when they hit 3 home runs off of them at home? I'm going to go with probably not. So let's stop blowing smoke up the St. Louis Cardinals booties fans for giving a standing ovation to the amazing Paul Skeens. On the opposite side of amazing, the Tampa Bay Rays. I watched a couple of the games this past weekend when they were playing in Atlanta against the Atlanta Braves. The Rays lost the series to the Braves, but that's not really the point. When I watch a Rays game, this is not a vintage team. I always think of that 2020 team, which was at the height of run suppression, playing almost at every position, like Gold Glove caliber defense, never giving up a run, trying to win every game, 3-2, 2-0. And when I watch highlights of this 2024 Tampa Bay Rays team, I see bad defense. I see no offense. It's not even highlights when I actually do end up watching games, because I'll watch a Rays game, I don't know, every 2 or 3 weeks. And you know what? I'm going to say it. I think the Tampa Bay Rays miss Wander Franco. Like, obviously, he has his big off the field issues, and I'm sure he's somewhere down in the Dominican Republic going through the process of justice and all that stuff. But this team has no offense. Josh Lowe has been injured off and on the whole year. Yadi Diaz keeps playing well, but it's like that's like one guy who plays first base, third base. And again, it drives me crazy. Yandi Diaz, this big, thick, powerful looking man, has no power. I think his career high in home runs is like 18. It's like, it drives me insane watching him. Yes, the Rays first baseman / third baseman, Yandi Diaz, won the American League batting title last year, but he has no offense. And I'm like, how can you look like that and not hit home runs? It makes my brain melt. It actually makes me frustrated, because on top of that, obviously the Rays are not going to go out and sign a big ticket free agent slugger to help this Tampa Bay Rays team, especially in the playoffs. Well, obviously the Rays are in last place in the American League East Division. I still think they can make a run for the wild card. It's only June. What I want to say is this 2024 Rays team is the least impressive Tampa Bay Rays team I've seen, I think, since like 2017. I don't remember. It's been a long time since I've seen this poor of a Tampa Bay Rays team. But I still believe in them. And just like the Rays, whose big test will be in the fall, because that's obviously when the playoffs start, our next guest is also hoping for a big fall election. This week, I'm happy to be joined by our special guest, Steve Novick, candidate for Portland City Council District Number 3. Steve, welcome to Last Call Baseball.
Thanks very much for having me.
You know, Steve, there are 2 things, not the only 2 things, but there are 2 things I love in this world. One could be baseball, and the other one is the people's limousine, aka the bus. And having gone around to like baseball stadiums around the country, I always notice there's a lack of public transportation towards a minor league team stadium, major league team stadium. What is it about public transportation in the U.S. that we have such a weird relationship with?
Well, I mean, it depends on where you are. Actually, my brother and I were just talking the other day about the fact that the cool thing about going to a game in New York, for example, is You get on the subway with other Mets or Yankees fans. You get off the subway with other Mets or Yankee fans. It makes it more of a communal endeavor. I think that, I mean, the further west you go, the more you have a situation where the city didn't really start getting big until cars started becoming dominant. And then, of course, there's places like Portland where there used to be streetcars and they just sort of died out. When you build cities around the car, and your priority is making sure that there's like 9 parking spaces for each car, et cetera, then after a while you make it really easy for people to drive. And once people are driving, and then you disinvest in public transportation, and then it's hard to get it back. And also, I mean, the truth is that investments in public transportation are expensive. If you wanted to build the New York City subway system in Portland, it would take a lot of money. So you need to get the financing to do that. But no, I think it's a tragedy that we don't have better public transportation in most of the country. I've lived in New York and Washington, D.C., where the subway takes you everywhere, and you never needed to have a car at all. And it's a pity that we haven't had that kind of investment in other places in the country, including here. I mean, Portland is better than a lot of cities, but when people talk about how great public transit is in Portland, I look at them like they're nuts because I remember New York and DC.
I really like how you had said it's a communal experience. For as you made an example to New York, and I also think of like Washington D.C., when you can also take the metro
Right,
directly to Nationals Park
right.
and where else. And actually, even though the city of Miami in Florida is not really known for being public transportation friendly, you can actually take a couple of buses directly to what is
Mhm.
it, Lone Depot Park, and also Chicago, of course, to go see the White Sox and then the Cubs. But yeah, it does add a sense of community where, if you go to a minor league game, I remember going like in South Carolina, it's like you just have to drive there. Like you just,
Right.
good luck trying to get a bus. And speaking of Washington, I know this is an audio only podcast, but what would you even call them? The regenerated Montreal Expos, because you're wearing a Montreal Expos baseball cap, the
Mhm.
Washington Nationals. It's funny going there because you actually see like Andre Dawson's at Nationals Park, Andre Dawson's retirement number with the old Expos. Where does your
Right.
love of you had said you've lived in the East Coast, you lived obviously now we'll talk about obviously what you're doing right now in Portland. Why in the world are you a fan of a Canadian baseball team?
Well, my family was actually living in sort of the broader Bay Area when I started following baseball. And initially, I was a Giants fan. But also, my parents were very lefty and very anti war. And when in 1972, I realized there was a team in Canada rooting for the Expos was sort of my way of dodging the draft or something like that, my way of protesting the Vietnam War. So I then, of course, was punished for my lack of patriotism by rooting for what was the least successful franchise in any major sport for the next 40 years. I think they've now been surpassed by the Nationals in terms of, the Mariners in terms of futility. That's the way it happened. And of course, the Expos for some time looked like they were going to be the team of the 80s. And then they could have been the team in the mid 90s. And as you know, everybody knows, they never made it.
Yeah, that's a tragedy with the strike in '94 when that Expos team was completely loaded, and of course they all went to greener pastures individually, and they all became no, they all continued to be amazing players.
Yeah.
You
74-40 was the Expos record when the season ended. The best season the Expos ever had, though, I mean, full season was 1979 when they won 95 games, which they never did again. And they lost the pennant to the Pirates because they lost 3 games out of 4 in a head to head series. And then the next year, in 1980, Mike Schmidt hit a home run and they lost the end of the season series to the Phillies. So, it's a game of inches. The inches were against the Expos.
oh, definitely being in a city like Portland that when you think of MLB expansion, Portland is in those cities that's always being mentioned. Portland, Nashville, Las Vegas, and even some Canadians trying to push to have Montreal back. Like, how do you feel about, maybe tugging at your heartstrings of, now you're a Portlander potentially with an MLB or your childhood team of the Montreal Expos maybe getting a team.
And this falls into the category of being a baseball fan is as you know a kind of an inherently irrational experience. And the truth is, I'd love to have a team in Portland, but I want my Expos back. I'm basically an Expos fan. So even though I went to precisely one Expos game in the 32 years that I was a fan, I went to the last game of the 1987 season. The Montreal Expos are my team, and I want them to exist again.
I love that. I love that. You're sticking with your principles, and everyone knows wanting a Montreal Expos team is a big vote getter in Portland.
Exactly.
I'm joking.
Well, I do want to say at this point that if you believe that having more Montreal Expos fans in public office is important, please go to my website, novickforportland.com. That's Novickfor Portland.com and donate. Because as far as I know, I'm the only rabid Montreal Expos fan running for office anywhere in the country.
I definitely want to talk about your candidacy and obviously some of your background in politics and working for the government, but staying right here with the Expos. Now I'm remembering you're one of the few people that heavily pushed to have who was it? Was it Andre Dawson, right? To go into the Hall of No, it wasn't Andre
No,
Dawson.
Dawson got in along. No,
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up. I'm glad you remembered that because one of my last acts when I was in the Portland City Council the first time in 2016 was that I introduced a resolution calling on the baseball writers to elect Tim Raines to the Hall of Fame. And my colleagues, most of whom probably had no idea who the hell Tim Raines was, was like, okay, Novick just lost re-election. He wants us to do this. We'll go ahead. So I was very pleased that was a unanimous vote. And of course, the Hall of Fame it did induct Tim Raines, and I was there for the induction in
Wow.
July 2017. It was like, that was sort of the last, great experience of being an Expos fan was being there for Tim Raines' induction. And a bonus was Bud Selig was also being inducted. And
Oh
Bud
Lord.
Selig, of course, tried to contract the Expos and was responsible for collusion and a whole bunch of other things.
Steroids.
So, yeah, right. So I had the opportunity to boo Bud Selig as he was being inducted. And I was delighted to find
Rightly so.
I was not the only one. There were a lot of people booing, which left me wondering, I wonder how many people who've been inducted in have been booed at their induction into the Hall of Fame. Bud Selig might be alone in that respect.
And actually, you know that I've spoken to another person. You might be aware of him, Chris Biddle, who also was pushing in Canada. He's a member of Parliament in Canada for Tim Raines inductions into the Hall
Ah,
of Fame. I don't know if he made it to the induction, but yeah, but he was also a big Expos fans when he was growing up, and so in his position as an MP, he did kind of the same thing what you did.
that sounds vaguely familiar. Have you ever been to the induction ceremony?
I haven't. No, I know
It
it's in
is
Coopertown. I don't know. Is it in the Hudson Valley or just like upstate New York?
it's in the Hudson Valley. It's like
Okay.
70 miles from Albany, I think.
Oh,
But
okay.
or maybe it's not technically the Hudson Valley. I'm not sure, but it's not that far. But it is a great experience. I mean, one thing, Cooperstown is a really cute town, but also most of the living existing Hall of Famers show up. And before the induction ceremony, they bring them out to take a bow. So when I was there, Hank Aaron was still alive. So you saw Hank Aaron and you saw Sandy Koufax. And it's really cool to me that the vast majority of them, I think, show up every year. And Cooperstown is kind of out of the way, but you get to see all the legends you grew up with.
Yeah, I just looked it up and it's actually west of Albany. So I think
Yeah.
it's probably considered like still like upstate West New York,
Yeah.
just outside of Hudson Valley. But yeah, but I haven't been, but I've been to the I've been to Hudson Valley, which is beautiful, but not
It
to
is.
Cooperstown yet. Yes. You, as I mentioned at the top, and we've been talking about here and there, you're currently a candidate to run for you. No, you are a candidate running
Yes.
for city commissioner. Obviously, as you had mentioned, Portland kind of changed their legislative ways of their representatives. You have previously served as a commissioner. You've done things like working with transportation, with homelessness, with not want to say gambling, but the lotto. And now you worked for the federal government, and now you're back.
No, I worked with the federal government long ago. I've been working for
Right,
the state government recently. Yeah.
right. And what is it about public office, public service that just is like a magnet for you that you just keep coming back and serving at any capacity that you're able to?
It feels good to be doing something for your community, whether that's your immediate community or the broader community. I mean, when I was working for the federal Justice Department from 87 to 96, it was nice to be suing polluters and to get up in court and say, Steve Novick, Your Honor, representing the United States. I sued a defense contractor in Fort Worth, Texas, that was playing games with Clean Air Act restrictions. And I was one of the last people to have the Love Canal case, where we collected bunch of money from the company that dumped toxic waste in Love Canal, and that was very satisfying. And it was also very satisfying at the state level. I spent years when I was working in campaigns against devastating proposed ballot measures, right-wing ballot measures that were attacking, Farley, hush, they were attacking public services or unions. And so I was engaged in a lawyer in the ballot title fights over how the measure was described in the ballot to make sure that they give an accurate picture of what they would do. And that I was part of the campaigns against these measures. And there were measures that would have done extreme damage to the state and to working people. And then when I was on the Portland City Council, Portland is a city that has neglected its transportation infrastructure for decades. And the truth is that the streets are still crumbling because we would have had to come up with like $1 a gallon gas tax to raise as much money as we actually needed. But I did convince the voters to pass a 10 cent a gallon gas tax, which hasn't even stopped the bleeding, but it slowed it in terms of street maintenance, and has paid for a number of safe routes to school projects, other projects to make it safer to be a pedestrian or a bicyclist. And I think I did had some success in getting people more aware of the impending earthquake and convincing people to bolt their houses to their foundations. And I mean, obviously, most of what you do in the city council is local. I did do something locally that I hope would be a model for the nation, although so far it's only been picked up by San Francisco, which was I passed a measure which imposes a slightly higher level of taxation on companies that pay their CEOs more than 100 times what they pay their typical worker. Because I think economic inequality is one of the biggest problems in America, but second only, I think, to climate change. And the fact that in the 1950s, when the American economy was the envy of the world, your typical CEO made maybe 20 times what the typical worker did. And now, for some Fortune 500 companies, it's thousands of times. And I thought that there should be something in the tax law to give them an incentive to change that. And they're not going to change their mind because of just what Portland did, but I was hoping that that would catch on and it would happen nationally.
The weird thing about politics, especially I'm only talking about the US because that's where we live, is when people put broad brushes of we should do this or they should do that, it's so politicized. But then when you actually break it down like you have, it's kind of like, yeah, of course we need to take care of potholes. Of course, someone who's making $100 million in share options because their share price of the company went really high, like that same type of mindset of if we give people, incentivize people with more money to do a better job, just like executive C-suites, CEOs, why wouldn't it work for the common rank that's down in the operations of, look, if we all do well, you'll do well as well. And when you
Yeah.
break it down like that, I think it's easier for people to digest versus just saying, let's just tax everyone that's worth over $100 million. Like it gets so political, but I like how you broke it down to like give examples because again, I think it's more palatable to people when you explain and give anecdotes and stuff.
And I think you're on something important, which is on a lot of issues, people talk about how polarized the country is, but a lot of issues it really isn't. I mean, I think that at least a plurality of Republicans think that CEOs make too much money and think that the rich are favored by the tax system. And when you poll the American people, the Republicans are supposedly anti-government and the Democrats are maybe sort of pro-government. But if you poll people on what government actually does and ask them, should we cut education? Should we cut Social Security? Should we cut Medicare? Everybody says no. There's hardly anything the government actually does that people actually want to cut. So that's one thing I've tried to do in politics is get Democrats to talk more about, talk about what government actually does. Challenge the Republicans to say what actual part of government they're against. Because the truth is, Americans across the board value the things the government really does. What a lot of them are against is the vague myth that government is doing something that they don't know about that's really wasteful.
I want to talk about something you had done when you're in your previous iteration on city council, which is something with the lotto and having the lotto pay out more money to the education system. Because, and I also want to do a Venn diagram with lotto gambling and baseball. But I'll let you explain what happened with the lotto system, and then I want to talk about the gambling and lotto in baseball.
That's something I worked on largely as a private citizen in the early 2000s, not something that I worked on the city council. I just became aware, I was working on a project for I think the Grand Ron tribe, where they were preparing to sort of have a fight with the video lottery taverns over something. You can't remember what it was. And I did some research into video lottery, and I learned that at that time, the taverns were getting 35% of the state's profits from video lottery. simply for letting, and all the taverns do is let machines sit on the floor. So some of them are making hundreds of thousands a year for allowing machines to sit on the floor, which actually attracts more customers. So I was appalled by that and like tried to find out what the basis for it was. And the basis was when the lottery commission was deciding how much to pay the taverns when they started the lottery, they arbitrarily came up with this 35% figure, and then they weren't about to change it because, well, we don't want to hurt our partners. And it's like, wait a minute. The purpose of the lottery is not to have a huge tavern welfare program. The purpose of the lottery is to provide additional funding for education. So saying that you're going to continue to give insane amounts of money to taverns because you don't want to, quote, hurt our partners is irresponsible and illegal. So I did, I started raising hell about the issue, got the teachers union involved, got another education organization called Stand for Children involved, started getting other folks speaking out about it. And the lottery did scale back somewhat what they were paying the video poker taverns, not as much as they should have, but they did. So and that was a satisfying and like very pure cause. Now I've noticed actually recently they've changed the way they pay them, and at first blush, it looks like they might have made it worse again. So I maybe need to get back into that topic.
Well, it's still a good thing, obviously, to help further fund the actual education where the money should go. Because so many states say, oh, this is for the future of South Carolina education system or the Florida state education system, which is sometimes it's really not that much as you're describing. Lotto is obviously a form of gambling. I love watching what is it on HGTV, My $1 Million Home, and all that stuff. Someone wins a scratch off or whatever, and they go in and they go buy their dream home. Staying with gambling, I don't know how you feel about gambling and wagering in baseball because I'm like, I can't believe that the country has moved in the last 30 plus years from gambling is a sin. It's verboten. But then now it's like you just open up your phone. I'm trying to remember that 1990s film that had Robert De Niro and I believe Wesley Snipes. He played he was like a player on the San Francisco Giants, and it was an obsession one. Do you remember this film?
I do not remember it.
And he ends up stalking him, and it's very scary. And now apparently there's stories coming out where not so much stalking, but angry gamblers who said, "Hey, Matt Chapman, I bet
Oh yeah.
$100 on you to get 2 hits yesterday against the Mariners, and you didn't." And they're hitting, and somehow his Venmo leaked out, and he had to change his Venmo because people were hitting up and saying, "Hey, Matt, you cost me money. You better pay me back." And you start thinking the crazy amounts of money that are put in gambling, this can be a very dangerous situation. And I was thinking about that when I was, looking at some of the work you did with Lotto, and I just wanted to see if you had any thoughts on gambling in baseball and sports in general.
I hadn't thought of the dangers to players that you just described, but that is really scary. I mean, the problem with gambling is that it tends to be a tax on addicts, on largely winds up being a tax on poor people. And I think that anything that encourages more gambling is unfortunate. I mean, as long as there was video lottery in Oregon, I wanted the schools to get as much as possible. But if somebody proposed getting rid of it, morally, I think it'd have to be for getting rid of it. I mean, I had a close family member who was addicted to Oregon video lottery and lost pretty much all of his life savings. It's a terrible thing, and I do not see why we need to legitimize and authorize more gambling on sports or anything else.
It's so easy. It's so easy that it's scary. And at the same time, I have friends who are on those apps. There's like 3 or 4 of them. They're always like,
Right.
"Oh, sign up now and you get $100 free, whatever." And they're like, "Oh, I have these. I bet $10 on the Dolphins game, and if the Dolphins win and the Chiefs lose by 3, and the sunrise tomorrow is yellow, I'm gonna win $500." And it's always like what is it they call it the parlays or the legs. There's always the last one that just like they just flush down $50, and $50 like once in a while I guess is okay because at the same time it's you go out to dinner, you go out for some drinks, you go see a
Right.
theater. There's every day. There's sports every day. You can bet on the Stanley Cup. There's baseball. Obviously, this baseball season lasts 17,000 days. But yeah,
Yeah.
that was something that I had in mind of just bringing that up with you.
For some reason, I'm get emails from some gambling advice thing about CBS or something, and I had no idea how many weird things people bet on. It was like how many the over under and how many 3-pointers Jason Tatum will take tonight. It's like what people bet on that.
Yeah, it's crazy, but yeah, we'll see. And at least with here I am going to defend state lottos. At least with the lottos, some of that money actually goes back into the air quotes community. When you're going to
Yes,
these apps, all that money is
right,
going directly into the owners of
right.
whoever owns the apps, which is not conducive. Again, at the same time, not every single business has to be in the business of funding, local and state and legislative, but it's just when you compare it to actually just going to buy a $2 lotto or a $5 scratch off, it's not quite the same. Anyways, who here? I couldn't believe I can't believe that I'd be here quasi defending state lottos. Anyways,
It's an important distinction you draw. Yeah.
yeah. Anyways, this is all fantasy world, but let's stay in the fantasy world. And we obviously hope you have many great successes with the upcoming election. But if we were to take you away from the good people of Portland and say, Steve, you are now the new Major League Baseball commissioner with all the powers invested in you, what's one or two things that you would do? And mind you, as the commissioner, you can do anything you want. You can say that we're only allowing pitchers, we're only allowing left-handed pitchers for this year. Anything you want. One or two things.
I'll have to mention three. The first is I would do whatever I could to bring baseball back to Montreal. Second thing is I would get rid of the goddamn ghost runner on second and extra innings. I mean, it's appalling. And frankly, I think it's an insult to Yogi Berra personally because they're trying to make the game over before it's over. And that's just wrong. And third, I would get rid of the designated hitter. I think that it was much more interesting when pitchers hit. It makes managerial decisions more complicated. It was cool when there were pitchers who actually could hit, so you could leave them in there and feel pretty good about it. And also, and this rarely gets mentioned, the AL introduced the designated hitter in 1973. 1973 was the last year of the great post-war economic expansion, during which everybody's incomes rose steadily and in an equitable way. So starting in 1974, you start seeing the middle class of America unraveling and huge increases in inequality. Is that a coincidence? I think not. And I think that now that we haven't quite seen it yet, but now that we've gone to the DH in both leagues, God knows what's going to happen to America and the middle class in particular.
I don't know. Now I'm gonna have to rethink anointing you as a new commissioner. I'm joking because I'm all for the Ghost Runner. One reason, as I joked earlier, as you know, baseball is 7 months long. And I think one of the reasons why the NFL has such great ratings and everyone's always crazy about it is because even though the NFL is trying to be like baseball, traditionally you have one game a week, whether you're a Seattle Seahawks fan, Arizona Cardinals, Miami Dolphins. So you can actually, you know what? I'm going to set aside 3.5 hours in baseball. And you really set aside 3.5 hours 6 times a week. I try to watch 3 or 4 games a week, but I can't watch the Braves game every single night.
See, I agree with with the pitch clock and other things they've done to speed up the game, but I think that the beauty of baseball is that there is no clock, and I'm quite happy as a fan to suddenly be watching a 13 inning game and wondering if it's ever going to end. I mean, I'm glad they're not doing it in the playoffs at least because the greatest game that I remember was Astros Mets Game 6, 1986, which went to 16 innings, and it felt like Game 7 because you knew that nobody could beat Mike Scott that year, and he would have been the pitcher of the Astros in Game 7. But I just think that the Ghost Runner makes a mockery of the game, and there's something I learned only recently, which we could fix this part. If you're the Ghost Runner and you score, you get a run scored. What do you do to become the Ghost Runner? You made the last out in the last inning, so you're rewarded for failure because somebody else drove you in. So at a minimum, they should say that some rebounds in
Like an
basketball
asterisk or something.
are team rebounds. They should say some runs nobody actually scored. They were team runs scored.
That's not a bad idea because what is it? People wanted to put an asterisk with next to when George Maris in 1961 hit 61 home runs. They were like, oh well, he did it in what 6 more games than Babe Ruth, and then obviously with Barry Bonds, so it
Yeah,
would
but
keep in the tradition of.
But this is different. This isn't like putting an asterisk. This is just saying you don't have to assign that run scored to anybody. You can just say the
I get
team
it.
scored a run. You
Yeah,
don't have to give credit to a guy who the reason he scored the run was he made the last out in the previous inning.
yeah. I've become a big fan of games being over in 2 hours and 40 minutes. I'm like, that I could do. I can't do those. I remember when I was starting to fall out of love with baseball is in the early part of this, as crazy as it sounds, the early part of this century in the aughts, when that whole big Red Sox Yankees rivalry, when ESPN was trying to like shove Red Sox Yankee game down your throat, and every single one of those games, playoffs or the regular season, were like 4 hours long, and I'm like, I can't do this. This is
I
so
don't,
boring.
it didn't used to be that way 40 years ago. And I'm not sure what drove, I mean, when there wasn't a pitch clock or anything, I'm not sure what wound up driving up the length of
And
games.
back then, there was unlimited managerial. When the manager was it mound
Right,
visits? Excuse me. There was no limit on it, and the manager would come out like three times in an inning.
right. But even so, somehow the game moved at a faster pace. And I haven't really seen a breakdown of why that happened. There was like, you might have remembered there was one guy, Mike Hargrove of the Indians, who was known for slowing down the game. He like took 6 timeouts per at bat. They called him the human rain delay, but that was like unusual. So I mean, I agree that they had to do something to speed the game up. I don't quite understand what slowed it down so much in the interim.
Now that you're talking, what I was thinking just as you were talking is just the bulkiness of players. I think steroids is part of it because when these guys are like, I'm getting paid to hit home runs, and so in one pitch you can be out. And if I'm getting paid to hit home runs, I need to be absolute. I need to feel that I'm ready for this next pitch. I take
Yeah.
my time out. I have to readjust my gloves and everything. I think that might have been one of the reasons where there, as you had mentioned, there's so many timeouts that you can take because I'm getting paid to hit home runs. And if I don't hit 40 home runs this year, I'm not going to get a contract extension. And all that was happening when, again, Barry Bonds is a great example. He was, in my opinion, the best player of his generation. No offense to Ken Griffey Jr. Pre steroids, he was still hitting 30 home runs. But then obviously McGuire came, Sosa, and all the monsters started appearing on the
Right.
baseball
And Bonds
landscape.
is like, well, if they're cheating, I'm gonna cheat too. I think that's
Yeah,
clearly
and
what happened.
it's sad, but it's at the same time you can see how his ego was hurt because he's
Right.
like, I'm the greatest baseball player. Now Mark McGuire, not
Right.
Sammy Sosa. Like I'm the greatest, and he was. But anyways, you're the commissioner, so I can't push back that much. But I totally agree with having the pitcher come back as but in both leagues to hit
Right.
because the first two pitchers that I think of that could hit Madison Bumgarner, even though I don't think he's in the league anymore, he was a phenomenal hitter with the San Francisco Giants, and then he even hit a couple of home runs in his last years with
Yeah.
Arizona Diamondbacks and the Atlanta Braves ace Max Fried. He was well because he doesn't hit anymore. He was a really good hitter, and he was actually sad that he couldn't hit anymore because he was
Yeah.
actually really good at it.
Bill Lee was appalled when the DH was adopted in the American League. He was delighted when he was traded from the Red Sox to the Expos so he could once again go up to the plate with a bat in his hand.
We can't run for office. We can't run a major successful sports league. We can't play sports without fuel in our belly and hydrating. I always love to ask all my guests wherever they live, in your case in Portland, what's a handful of places that you enjoy locally going to when you want to get a coffee, drink, food, what have you in your neighborhood?
Well, in my immediate neighborhood, I go to the Grand Central in Woodstock a lot, but also in my district is my brother lives really like 50th and Division, and there's two places at 50th and Hawthorne that we go to. One is a coffee shop, Albina Press, and then there's a restaurant, the Sapphire Hotel Restaurant. I don't think there actually is a hotel. That's what they call the restaurant. And those are really good places. My favorite breakfast place is the J&M Cafe, which is at 6th and Oak, something like that. No, 6th and Ash. And then this is outside my district, but I go there, so I should mention it. The Limelight Bar and pub in Selwood. So those are some of. Oh, and Casa Italia, Italian restaurant on Division. That's a good start. Oh, and by the
Well,
way, I should mention that another great place in my district that's not a place for food and drink is the batting cages in Montevilla, batting 1,000. If you
great.
really
Well,
have to hit a baseball, you need to go to Montevilla and go to batting 1,000.
no, definitely. When I make it out to the Great Northwest, I'm definitely going to replay this to get to jot down some of these notes. Steve, thank you so much for joining us. Let us know where we can find you online, or obviously your website as you're running for commissioner in District 3 in Portland.
It's just Novick for Portland.com, and it's FOR, not the number four, Novick. forportland.com. It mentions a couple of other places in Portland that are worth going to. And again, there's a donation button. So if you think we need more Montreal Expos fans in politics, please help out the campaign.
In honor of Steve and the Baseball Hall of Fame, I'm drinking a beer from a good American local brewery called Witty, Wittle, Witbier. There's way too many W's. It's a hazy Belgian style Witbier from Keg and Lantern Brewing in Brooklyn, New York. Even though it's a wheat beer, Witbier, obviously my German's not that great. Usually you think of German beers as being heavy. This is actually a light, good summer beer as we are in the middle of summer here. I expected it to be heavier. I'm happy. My tummy's happy. And I'm happy that I'm going to see another Paul Skeens start this week. Besides my happiness, this is the part of the podcast where I'm supposed to mention our social media, t-shirts available to buy, rate and review the podcast, blah, 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 blah. All those links are in the show notes. Thanks for listening to Last Call Baseball. Be great and get home safe.